Think about how history usually records the moment a leader crushes their enemies. The imagery is consistent: chests puffed out, grand parades, and the visible domination of the loser. We expect the winner to occupy as much space as possible. But in the 8th year after the Hijrah, a force of 10,000 soldiers marched across the Arabian desert toward Mecca. Inside the city, the people who had spent 20 years persecuting these men were bracing for a bloodbath. They locked their doors and waited for the retribution they knew they deserved. The army arrived, but the entry looked nothing like a conquest. As the Prophet Muhammad rode into his hometown, he didn't look up at the crowds. He was bowed so low on his camel that his beard actually brushed against the saddle. As he rode, he was reciting a short 3-verse chapter of the Quran called Surah Nasr. It provides a specific set of instructions for what to do after you win. The text presents a paradox. It describes a total triumph, yet it commands the victor to ignore their own ego, praise God, and, most strangely, ask for forgiveness. The phrase "Iza Ja" isn't a hope, it's a linguistic guarantee that God's help is already on its way. Scholars debate its exact timing, arguing this promise of success was actually delivered years earlier, while the Muslims were still being heavily persecuted in Mecca. That promised help eventually materialized. 10,000 troops occupied the city, and for the first time in history, the Quraysh were completely powerless. The Prophet stood before the very men who had pinned his followers to the hot sand and driven them into exile. He had every legal and historical right to execute them all. Instead, he offered a blanket amnesty. He told them there was no blame on them and that they were free to go. By refusing to take revenge when it was fully justified, he broke the cycle of violence that had defined tribal Arabia for centuries. He demonstrated that the highest form of power is the ability to restrain oneself. This act of mercy triggered a mass conversion. The 2nd verse describes seeing people entering the religion in massive, surging waves. But the wording here is precise. It says they entered the deen, the outer system and community of Islam. It doesn't use the word iman, which refers to the deep conviction of the heart. The surah acknowledges that thousands were joining the movement, but that true faith is a much deeper internal journey. The philosopher Allama Iqbal noted that while outward prayers might fill every neighborhood, the transformative internal conviction of the early believers is often missing. This brings us to the final command: Fasabih, praise your Lord, and istighfar, seek his forgiveness. When you finally reach a long-term goal, your brain naturally looks for someone to credit. Usually we look in the mirror. We credit our own genius or our own hard work. In this way, winning becomes a dangerous spiritual trap. It feeds the ego until you forget that you had any help at all. The command to seek forgiveness forces the victor to stop and acknowledge that the outcome was never entirely in their hands. It kills human arrogance by attributing the triumph back to its divine source. There is a 3rd historical context for this surah. The Prophet recited it during his final pilgrimage, standing before more than 100,000 Muslims. When his closest companions heard it, they began to weep. They realized that if the victory was complete and the message was delivered, the Prophet's mission on earth was finished. For them, Surah Nasr was a signal that he would soon be leaving them. But for those of us living today, this chapter functions as a psychological check for our own moments of success. Consider how you handle your own milestones. When you get the promotion, the degree, or the wealth you've been chasing, the modern instinct is to puff out your chest and tell the world you're self-made. The model provided in Surah Nasr suggests a different posture. Instead of standing tall to be seen, it suggests bowing the head in gratitude. The conquest of Mecca suggests that a win is only as great as the humility that follows it. You haven't truly succeeded until you can look at your greatest achievement and realize